The Dullahan. The night was dark and fierce with rain, and Charlie Cullen could not see the road. He rode his horse along the banks of the Blackwater, clutching at his oilskin hat. He was late, and he knew it, for he had stopped too long at the pub while his wife waited back home for the sultanas and raisins packed into his bag from which she would make the barn brack. As Charlie rode, he looked towards the quarter moon in the hope it would break free and brighten the road. He began to whistle an old song, and he called to his horse and gave it praise, and it was then he heard what sounded like a whispering sound behind him. The rain was pounding the earth, and as he turned around, but it was too dark to see, so he rode on thinking his mind was playing tricks on him. The whispering continued, and he thought he could hear a horse behind him, but he was too afraid to look. As a boy, he had heard tales of the Dullahan appearing along this road, but he didn't believe them. It was said the headless rider on a black horse drew out your soul by calling your name. You've had too much to drink, he thought, and he hurried along, but the mare grew nervous under him, and he called to her to hold steady. It was then he heard his name being called in a commanding voice that chilled him to the bone. The moon had broken free and shed blue light on the road. He told himself not to look, and he closed his eyes. Then he turned around and he saw the Dullahan bearing down on him. The horseman rode a towering black horse without stirrups and carried his head under his arm. And what Charlie Cullen saw on that head was the worst thing he had ever seen. The mouth was stretched into a hideous grin that reached both sides of the skull. The eyes, they weren't the eyes of a human at all, and they were wriggling in their sockets, while the flesh on the head had taken a look of clotted cheese left out for months. The mouth of the headless rider licked its lips with a horrid long tongue, and he called out, "Charlie Cullen, you are coming with me tonight." Charlie didn't stop, but he nudged his horse into a canter. "I can't help you there," he said. "I have to get these sultanas home for me wife. She'll kill me if I don't." "We'll see about that," the Dullahan said. "I'll go with you if I have to," Charlie said, "but please, just let me place a bet with you first. Let us race this night to Mizenhead, and if I beat you there, you let me go." He was looking down at the Dullahan's hideous head, and he saw it smile as though it knew there could only be one outcome. But what the headless rider couldn't know was that Charlie Cullen's mare was a champion hurdler, and there wasn't a steeplechase or a fox hunt in the land in which Charlie didn't come first. Charlie's horse pulled at the reins, impatient to be off, and then Charlie was off at a gallop, and the headless horseman followed, unaided by whip or spur. And soon they were neck and neck, and they rode the dark night and pounded the earth, and Charlie grew afraid for his horse. They tore through the fields of the winter crops and raced through farmyards while dogs howled and birds shook awake and grew confused, thinking the moon was the sun. They followed the winding roads toward Mizenhead, and Charlie saw his eyes squirming in the skull and that gruesome mouth grinning at him. "Charlie Cullen," the headless horseman said, "your luck has run out tonight." And it was then, before them, the road split in two as the Dullahan was racing ahead. "Which way is it now?" the headless horseman called out. "I have not been down this way before." Charlie Cullen leaned even lower into his horse, dug in his heels, and he called out, "It's the right turn there. The other road leads you wrong." With that, the Dullahan swerved right, and he carried on, but Charlie Cullen kept left, and he raced on, letting out a great laugh, for he was on the right road all along. And then it was before him, the southernmost point of Ireland, and he brought the horse to a stop and turned around and could see neither headless rider nor horse behind him. To the east, the sea was red with blood of the winter sun, and the road remained silent behind him. Charlie Cullen waited like that, watching the mist rise from the sea and the new day rise before him. He was miles from home, but he didn't care. He'd won the race with the Dullahan, and from that day on, the headless horseman did not trouble him.